So yeah, let's do our check-in for Empire of Silence. I don't have the book to show my bookmark check. But
The Sun Eater.
I think we're both like in the 30s. Are you past 40? You were like on 40 last time I talked, right?
I'm on 39, I think, right now. So I'm right at 40.
I'm at like 36 or so, but I've read past where you are. So we can talk about anything you've read, I have read, because I read this book back when we were doing one of the other Dark Tower series books, and I got I was listening to it at night to fall asleep, and I knew that we were going to do it in the future, and I got so far into it that I was like halfway through the book, and I was like, I got to stop, or otherwise I'm going to have to read the whole book again, and it kind of hit like a lull for me where I quit reading it, and I was kind of like, man, this is like I don't know if I like this book or not. Like it's getting good reviews on YouTube, and I feel like I'm missing something here. It's got to be better than I think it is, but I'm kind of in this, and you and I are in it now. There's this middle section of the book where I'm just like, I feel like we're just going like every chapter, so much time has passed, and Hadrion's like in a new place, and like it just keeps changing. And I want to go back to that opening story. I want to know more about what happens there. Right. And that's why I quit reading it the first time. And I'm glad we went back and reread it, because I loved the opening so much more on the second read than I did the first time. There's so many calls to events later on in the book, in the beginning of the book, that I didn't catch on first read. That I appreciate it a whole lot more now. That I did that I read it halfway through and then gave up and started over again. But Empire of Silence, if you haven't read the book, we're going to talk about spoilers for the first more than a quarter of the book, not quite a half, first third of the book.
Third, maybe, yeah.
So the setting, it's a sci-fi, and I would say it's probably considered high sci-fi because of the concepts that are in the book, but you can almost picture a fantasy, because it's not like every chapter or every page has like some elaborate hologram and speaking over. It's like it's very fantasy like, but it does deal with like cryo sleep and colonizing other planets and
space travel and all kinds of stuff.
So what I wanted, I wish that we had done an episode before you got to chapter 20, because the first 20 chapters is all the story of the Marlowes, House Marlowe.
House Marlowe.
Our main character is Haydrion Marlowe, who is the son of like a great emperor-like figure, Lord Alistair Marlowe. His younger brother, Crispin Marlowe, is the assumption at the beginning of the book is that Hadrian is going to be the heir to the throne of this empire someday, and him and his brother are sort of being trained as if they are one day going to be, part of this ruling class. And it's in the first chapter, it's revealed, and even in the prologue, I think, even on the description on the back of the book, it's revealed that the story is being told from the perspective of sort of Hadrian's memoirs in some way. It's Hadrian recounting his life, and in this recounting, we're going to hear why the world, the system at large, knows Hadrian as the Sun Eater, the destroyer of this sun that like genocides like an entire race of the Cielsen. And this book, so that's the ending of the book, basically revealed there. And
right at the beginning.
Yeah, right at the beginning, literally the back cover of the book. And it's going to be why and how and what leads up to this is what all the compelling part of the story is. But in the first part of the book, we learn that Hadrian, born of this Alistair and Liliana Marlowe, in a vat. Alistair and Liliana basically don't even have like a relationship together.
Yeah.
It's like completely like they just chemically put their fluids together and made Hadrian. And Hadrian is like this like pristine, genetically modified human that they are going to live for like 1,000 years. He's not susceptible to any disease. Like he is just like this perfect, like human form. His skin is pale. And there's, what I found interesting about that whole concept is there's parts of the book where he's like in the city with the plebeians, and he's like, he sees people that are like his age, but they look so old,
Right.
And he's like, this elderly woman who's probably younger than I am, but because she's not wealthy enough to have this genetic mutation, she's forced to live like a normal human, and therefore she's like this old lady. Go ahead.
One of the things I found interesting too is you had the group, and I forgot what they're called, like Peloton, not Peloton, that's the bike.
The
whatever they are, it starts with a P. So like they are like this class that's like at the top.
Yeah.
And so like they're genetically
Palatine,
something
like that. I know what you're talking about.
But they are like, so like they're genetically created before birth, like, and they're made. And then you have this other group that's below them that are, I don't know that there's really any normal born, but they're not genetically altered. But later in life, as they grow and they do things and they accomplish things, they're allowed to be genetically altered as they grow to like, so like the head of their guard was like, he can live a little bit longer now, and he's a little bit better at this because he gained that status to be able to get that stuff.
And it's a show of status, like having a Louis Vuitton purse. Like it's like a show of status, because there was the debutantes or whatever. I can't remember what they were called, but there was the people that came in like chapter 3 or 4 to talk to Alistair, and Hadrian was not invited. And he kind of like puts himself in the conversation because he was kind of offended that he wasn't invited. And there was the lady with like the gold or silver teeth. Yes. And Hadrian's like, why would they have white. Like, why would you choose that color? But it's the status thing. She wants people to see that she has those genetically modified. Yeah. I forgot about that. So the dynamic, I would say, especially in this first part of the book, but even later on, because his shadow is cast, through all of this story that we've read so far. Sort of the villain of the book, the bad guy of the book, is Alistair Marlowe. Like, the father is such a menacing figure. Those first chapters, those first 19 chapters, rereading those was like amazing to me. I don't know where it's going from here, and I imagine that it's gonna kick off into something completely unexpected. But that first part of the book, if the whole book was that, I would love it. I loved the dynamic of like the games of castles, between between Crispin and Hadrian and Alistair. Every scene Alistair is in, I could just picture if this was like a Stanley Kubrick film where like every scene Alistair is in, he's always in some chair or some throne higher than everyone else in the room. Yeah. It's always like the most menacing thing, the most menacing piece of architecture. It just the whole book gives like that sort of Stanley Kubrick vibe. The guards, like the royal guards, and that follow Hadrian and Crispin around everywhere they go. They wear these. It's almost like the red guards on Star Wars. Like they wear these like suits with no faces. It's just completely smooth. And
then they see like a digital projection inside of what's happening.
Yeah, I love the imagery in the book, and reading it a second time, I really appreciated it. But Hadrian's probably his closest relationship is with his tutor, Tor Gibson, who is a scholiast, which there's the chantry and there's the scholiast. There's sort of two factions of, one is like the scholiasts are kind of like
Vulcans.
Vulcans. Yeah, exactly. That's what I was trying to think of. They're like Vulcans, where they have learned to like master
logic
emotions. Yeah.
No emotion. Everything is.
They're really just like the
black
Vulcans.
and white. Yes.
Like there's all these like rumors that they they go through these like crazy treatments to take their emotions out of them and all this stuff. But in reality, they have emotions. They just spend their lives like learning to master them, which is the same as the Vulcans. People make the mistake of believing that it's some trait to their race, but it's not. They train and they learn to do that.
Well, emotions get in the way of
reason
and logic. So like you got to get rid of those things. And there's certain
fear
instances
is
where,
a poison. Yeah.
Right. Like Hadrian will, like, when he realizes that one, he's not going to be the heir.
Yeah.
And then two, that not only is he not going to be the heir, but he's going to be banished to the Cielson. Gibson actually has
he's banished to the Chantry.
The Chantry, yes.
Yeah. I was like, damn, they're feeding him to the Seventh Cielson.
I know, right? Like he shows emotion. He's sad that that's going to happen, and like you see, like Hadrian notices, like he said, oh, he didn't take the look off of his face like in time and things like that. So like, which is crazy too. Not only like do they not show emotion, but the whole civilization in general, like everything that they do or say or whatever is being recorded.
Oh yeah. There's cameras.
So like there's cameras literally everywhere. And so like not only can they not show emotion, but then you have to be very careful when he does show some emotion, or even let something out of the ordinary happen. Like he can get in a lot of trouble for that. And it reminds. Go ahead.
It reminds me of like to the plebeians, Hadrian is this, he gets beat up in the scene by the guys with they burn their nose whenever they commit some kind of crime, and they tattoo the crime on their head.
Tattoo the crime.
And they make comments about like how privileged he is and how like, what's he doing down here, and all this kind of stuff. And from their perspective, Hadrian has this life that is like just above, just, like anybody would trade places with Hadrian easily. And the truth is, Hadrian is so alone. He's so disconnected from his parents. He can't have any friends other than his brother, who he can't stand.
Yeah.
And like he's probably the loneliest, most restricted person. Like you said, facial expression, everything he has to calculate and think about how he was taught to do it. In the conversations between Hadrian and the miner, the lady that was like in charge of the miners on some distant planet, and she's trying to get Hadrian to fund repairs and stuff because she's losing workers in these mines. That whole conversation where he's talking about how he shouldn't have bent down and picked up her pen when she dropped it. And he shouldn't have smiled at something she said. Like he has to think about every action he takes because he's been trained since he was a child to, and technically based on the age of his life, he's an infant. Like he's still a child. And so yeah, he is like, it's funny. It reminds me of, and I hate to connect this back to real world, but it reminds me of recently there was an interview with Elon Musk, and there's a part, and people laugh at the interview because there's some really funny parts of it, but there's this one part where it seems like Elon is really being real for a moment. He talks about how lonely he is and like how no one can connect to him. And it is true. He has to be the loneliest person. Like who can relate to this guy? Who can connect to this guy that doesn't have some other, ulterior motive? Like that to me, that's what Hadrian is. Like Hadrian is like locked away in this castle. Like there's no way to relate to him, to connect to him. He's not allowed to make connections. And we find that later on in the story, which I don't want to jump, there's still more about this part I want to talk about, but later on in the story, whenever he's like on the streets and like trying to survive with Cat, or in the Colosso trying to survive as a gladiator, in some ways he's happier there and actually makes real connections with real people for the first time ever in his life. And in the words of his,
to the point where like even when they're friendly to him, he's like he doesn't get it. Like why? Like I don't.
What are they gaining from being friends with me? Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, now I'll say one thing about Hadrian, and I'll really like his character because, and what to me sets this first part of this book off from, any other book of where you have like what's supposed to be a great hero and all this stuff is he's not likable a lot.
Yeah.
There's a lot of stuff where you're like, man, this guy's an ass, or like, he's a jerk, or like, and he also
It's that aristocratic.
doesn't, yes, well, he doesn't always come out on top, which is another really interesting thing about him. Because usually in these epic hero quest things, they, regardless of the thing, they'll somehow overcome something, and that like early on, like when he's walking and he gets jumped by the guys, like I kept thinking, okay, like, here comes the hero thing. He's gonna like do something. He's gonna wind up beating these guys up, and then it's totally opposite. He winds up getting beat up and kind of put in a coma type thing. And there's certain situations that happen, like he offends Cat early on. He he's really not
whenever
nice.
So one thing is too is like he will recognize something is wrong, but he doesn't have that like Peter Parker mentality where it's like, okay, I've seen a wrong in the world, so I must right it. You know what I mean?
Right,
I'm the hero,
exactly.
so I must right it. And so like, whenever he first he recognizes that the Umand are being mistreated on the main planet they go to, it's not like he all of a sudden says, I'm going to start working on a way to try to free these like creatures. Like, he's just like, yeah, the world's messed up.
He's definitely a very flawed character. Like, and at the beginning, you get this kind of going along what we were saying earlier with his mother and father aren't really like, they don't have a relationship. So like the mom is always at her home and dad's always doing his thing. And so like he looks down on both of them, and he even there's a good part about how like he doesn't even think his mom even knows he exists, kind of thing. Like she just totally ignores him. And then it turns out she's been working behind the scenes and doing all this stuff to get him off of this world, and he never realizes it. And like you can see his character as like kind of being self-centered in that kind of area as far as where his mom is, and he's always looking at the negative things. I don't know, it feels like he doesn't even try to learn or get to know. He has these preconceived notions that this is how his family are. I also think he's nervous with the cameras and all that stuff. You also have to be very careful.
I think that's more present with Crispin than with his mom. So with Crispin seems like he's trying to be a good brother. It's just what Crispin wants out of life and wants out of the world is just like completely different than Hadrian. Like Hadrian sees the Chantry as these propagandist, like warmongering, power-seeking torturers, like, and he wants to have no part in it. And
they talk about crusades.
Yeah.
So the image I got from the Chantry was that they are basically the Spanish Inquisition.
Yeah.
They're going around, they're looking for anything and their religion is definitely different.
Yeah.
It's not like we would think God, but like
they worship the fabled earth. So like they believe that the earth, like I can't remember exactly how it's worded
or something.
Yeah, and it gave up its resources like as a sacrifice so that the humans would would reach out into the stars and cultivate other places. Like they had this whole religious symbolism around basically a planet dying because humans abused all the resources. And I thought that whole concept was extremely interesting. And and you can't help but to compare it to this book is written, and I've watched interviews with the author, and this book is written in such a way that there's so many things that like harken back to real historical figures. Like, I mean, obviously Hadrian reads like Caesar. Like I feel like I feel like his personality, especially in the beginning of the book, is like the way he talks about himself and talks like it sounds like Caesar. Caesar.
But they even have a discussion about Caesar.
Yeah, yeah. You caught that there was a Karate Kid reference in one part. Yeah, I wouldn't have caught that. But there is in the Gladiator part. There's a part where he says "blood and thunder," and I was thinking, is so when I hear "blood and thunder," I think of World of Warcraft. But I bet that's also just a phrase that's used like in a bunch of stuff, and maybe World of Warcraft is referencing something more historic that I would be more cultured if I knew, but I know it from WoW. I don't know, but the orcs say blood and thunder, so I don't know if it's harkening back to that on purpose or not.
So there's a thing that I've always noticed in a lot of sci-fi, especially that is Earth-based and takes place way in the future. So like examples are like Star Trek: The Next Generation or like the Fifth Element movie. This book, obviously, like and other things where, so like my biggest example is I'm sure you've seen Fifth Element.
Mm-hmm.
So there's the scene where toward the end, she's watching all this video footage of war and destruction and all this and kind of like processing if humanity is worth saving.
Yeah.
And so, and then I also go to like, with Star Trek when they go to the holodeck or they talk about things in the past, or this where they talk about Caesar and Shakespeare and things like that.
Yeah,
it's always all these things are always from our familiar Earth.
Oh yeah.
And so like I'm waiting, I want
Star Trek
history to come in, like, because Star Trek does it.
Star Trek does it. Yeah, Star Trek does it where they in the Next Generation, that first episode, you're right. They and it's a trial. Q is like putting Picard on trial if humans are worth saving. Yeah,
right.
And most of the references are from like, obviously from
way
prior,
a long time ago.
But then but they do throw in a few references to like, there's like, humans are like doing this like whole drug thing to be these like super soldiers and all that.
Right.
But then also I think about like Cisco in Deep Space Nine. He goes back in time to a historical moment, and it's one that's still in the future from us. So Star Trek addresses it. But I know what you mean though. It's sci-fi. It's always like whenever they reference like important moments in history, it's like, oh, it all took place before 2019. You know what I mean?
Right. That's like you're watching The Fifth Element. You're like, okay, she's looking at like war and destruction from
there should be like
most likely have been 1,000 years. Humans would have changed so much in that time frame. Like, where's the war that happened right up before? But anyway, I get this a lot in this book too, like, because there's a lot of references to the past.
But there's also a lot of references. So one thing about the way this book is written is it's written as if you are a member of this war, of this world.
Yeah.
So if the book is written from the perspective of Hadrian Marlowe, so he references things. And he references it in such a way that you're expected to know what he's referring to, but yet you don't know what he's referring to. Like,
well, it took me a while to get going at the beginning of the book because I had to like
he talks
figure
about
a lot of things out.
Like he says something like, I can't remember the exact wording, but there's a quote where he says something like, "And you laugh, but I fashioned myself after Simeon the Red," or like he says like you laugh like you're going to be in on the joke, but as the reader, we're not in on the joke.
I have no, who the hell is Simeon the Red? Like,
but that's that. So Simeon the Red is cool too, because it's like, it's mentioned as this historical figure at the beginning of the book. And you slowly learn more and more about who that person was. And there's another one too. There's two figures that he mentions a lot in this book. And over time, you learn more and more about, like, he tells Kat the story of Simeon the Red. Maybe he tells Kat the story of one of them.
Yes.
And then he tells the story, like, but when they're originally mentioned, it's as if you're supposed to know who they are, because you obviously, if you found his memoir in the library of whatever, you obviously know who Simeon the Red is.
So this, and you sent that video, but even before I watched that video, I got from just the opening couple chapters was Dune. Like, to me, like, a lot of Dune in this. And especially with the family and the houses. And
it makes me want to read Dune because
Dune is so good. Now, I will say that this isn't as complex as far as
Dune,
like that setup.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot more like, and in Dune, Frank Herbert does the same thing. He just assumes you know all this stuff from something he made up, and like so that's why it took me like the what these different classes and the Cielson and all these different things, and like
I'm so intrigued by the Cielson.
Right.
I've read further. Yeah, I've read further than you, so I know that there's something coming up, but I want to know more about. I feel like it's going to be later books before we really know. It's going to be kind of like the way gosh, we haven't read a Sanderson book in so long I forget, but the way in The Way of Kings, they basically don't show like hardly any perspective from the singers. What do they call them? What do the humans call the singer? I can't remember what they call them. We gotta go.
Correct.
By the time the 5th book comes out, we're not gonna remember anything that happened in the first four. But yeah, I think it's gonna be like that where we're not really gonna learn until the next book or something.
Right.
But I'm so intrigued by the Cielson because they just keep coming up as this like menacing enemy, but they're so far away that it would take them like many years to even get to where Hadrian is, and so
they don't have a planet, and they just float through space, like
and they eat each other, and they
eat each other and people.
Yeah.
So basically, they're like, I don't know. I guess like if you were thinking of in terms of like Independence Day, the movie, they're like that. They go to a planet and they decimate the planets for its whatever it has, natural resources and everything else, and then they take the people and eat them. At least that's what is portrayed now. Whether or not that's true, or not, I guess we'll find out.
One of the books I've these books are so hard to find that I buy them when I see them, and one of the books I have has a Cielson on the cover, so I kind of know what they look like, and it does remind me a lot of Sanderson's the singers.
Right.
And so I think there's going to be way more to them once we finally get introduced.
And they've it's one of those things where I feel like you're building up this group to be like this, just terrible, like evil, like everything. And then there's obviously
Hadrian is so intrigued by him.
Yes.
Hadrian is so intrigued by him, but he has also not like Hadrian's intrigued by him because he thinks that they're complex and interesting. He's not necessarily saying, "Oh, I think you guys are all wrong about him." You know what I mean? He's just like, yeah, they're not like, there's motivation.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. But he's not saying they're not monsters either, so it's interesting. I wonder where that's going, but so let me ask you about chapter 19. So chapter 19 is whenever, oh God, there's another thing I want to talk about too. The relationship, before we get to chapter 19, the relationship between Hadrian and the pilot lady. Oh God, I can't remember her name. That relationship is, it's only in those first chapters, but I was rooting for them so much. Like, but then whenever Hadrian has the moment where he tries to express his feelings to her and kisses her, and then realizes like, oh, this can never be because of my place, my status, and hers, that it can never be. Even if she agrees to it, I'll never know if it was because of the power I hold over her, or if she truly has feelings for me. Or will she, could she could never say no to me. So how can I ever trust her? Yes. Like that dynamic.
Yeah. That was really cool.
So heartbreaking of a dynamic.
When he kisses her, and then like he registers like her face and everything, and then she's like, oh, if you want to go into the room, she's basically like, I'll give myself up to you.
Yeah.
And then that's when he's like, she just thinks I want sex, and she's willing to do whatever. Like, this has nothing to do with how she thinks of me.
And because of Hadrian's status, she would be willing to like wife Hadrian. You know what I mean? Like,
Oh, definitely.
like she is so committed to being a servant to him that if he had said, you know, I want to get married, I'm maybe I don't know if she'd leave the planet with him. I imagine she probably would, but you know, she willingly she would marry him and be his wife forever. But Hadrian knows that like I can never trust that she
Right.
really feels that way. And that's that again, it goes back to that example of like Hadrian is like the loneliest person on this planet. Even more so than Crispin. Crispin and Hadrian are like in the same scenario, but like Crispin is just like along for the ride. Like like he's just down for whatever. It reminds me of me and my stepbrother. My stepbrother was a lot like Crispin, and I was a lot more like Hadrian.
Well, you know, it's crazy. I get from Crispin that you don't get a lot from that is what his father really thinks about him.
Mm-hmm.
Because obviously he wants him as his heir, but it's more because like they're looking at the cruelty.
Yeah.
And his.
Yeah. Crispin's
like,
willing to go along with it.
To go along with anything. And that's more important than.
Alistair's a smart guy. I think he's smart enough to know that if Hadrian were in charge, he would not. And maybe it's, I don't know what this world, I don't know what this universe is like. I don't know what situation they're in. This could be like a Warhammer's type situation where like it's like extremely grim. And maybe truthfully, Hadrian does not have what it takes to survive, like keep the human race surviving in this universe with what's at stake. And so maybe Alistair is right in that like Crispin is a more is a better heir to this throne. But he's right. Smart enough to know, whether it's for good reason or not, he's smart enough to know that Hadrian would not rule in the same way that he does. And
well, the thing with that is when we were talking about earlier with the lady and wanting the new equipment for mining.
Yeah,
is Hadrian looked at that and said, "Oh, we can increase production, we can save people's lives, and all the positives that would come out in investing in this."
Yeah,
and it's completely wrong from what the father wants.
Yeah,
because he sees it as that's not their place. Mm-hmm. It wasn't her place to even talk to you anyway. If that costs money, why should we care if a few of these people die?
Yeah, he says something like, they'll start to believe that they deserve it, or something like that. He has some quote like that, which I mean, damn, we were just talking about the situation at Hasbro.
Well, they're yeah, exactly. They're cattle. Like all those people are donkeys, cattle, any kind of work animal, a horse. That's what they see them as. They're not in anywhere near their level of human would be. And so like it's kind of in going back to the Star Wars reference, like the Emperor rules the Star Wars galaxy by fear and intimidation, and they make it seem pleasant where we're going to take care of you and you're going to be protected if you just do everything we say without question. But as in anything, that's never going to happen because people are awful and they don't care about the small people. And kind of the same with Dune. He is Delos is the name of their planet. He's like the ruler of Delos, Alistair, the father. Mm-hmm. But then there's like an emperor that's over like all of the planets. And so like the father also wants to move, like he wants to retire or whatever and leave this planet to one of the sons. And then he would take up like a bigger position as far as across the universe. But he
even sees his sons as pawns in this political game.
Well, that's his. He sees Hadrian as something that's going to keep him from gaining that position. Yeah, because of the way he looks at humanity and actually has some kind of emotion and feeling toward them. And Hadrian realizes that ever since he was born, he's been a tool and not a child. He's been that. And one of the weird things between him and Crispin that I also found interesting is that they're both children are genetically altered and they're made to be, and Crispin is often referred to as, he's taller, he's better looking, he's a lot of these things better. But like, my question is, if you're able to genetically make a person, like, I don't understand. I mean, obviously they wouldn't all be identical, but like,
couldn't
it's
you?
Just weird to me that Hadrian would be shorter and so much different than what
that's an
that
interesting
group of people. Like, why?
Yeah.
Why is he so different? Like,
that is an interesting. I didn't think about that. That is an interesting. I kind of have a fan theory going on in my head right now, but
because even now, I mean, essentially, if you wanted to, you could have your baby modified to have certain eye color or something like that. So at this point in the future, you would think they'd be like, okay, he's got to be at least 6'5", and I want him with a chiseled chin and like all this stuff. And the fact that he's shorter, and it just seemed a little bit off to me. Like, and why is that? Like,
that is interesting.
So, I mean, maybe there's something to that. Who knows? But like,
that is interesting. But so back to chapter 19.
Yes.
Whenever Hadrian, he parts ways with Delos and he gets on the ship and he meets this entire crew. Like, they introduce these characters. They seem like they're going to be, all right, now we're following these people for the rest of the story.
Right.
I really like the like pirate captain guy, and
exactly, I liked him too.
And and
his wife.
Yeah, and I didn't really like the homunculoid thing or whatever that Hadrian was so offended by. Although they mentioned like 3 times, at least twice, they mentioned that his grandfather was killed by one of them during the act of lovemaking. That's definitely going to be a part of like some future.
Gotta be something, yeah.
Yeah.
Throw that out there,
right? I mean, they threw it. They made sure you got it because they mentioned it twice. And there's a bunch of stuff like that in the first part of the book that like where he mentions the whole gladiator thing and like the gladiators on such and such planet. And the first time I read it, I just thought, oh, this is another one of those things where if I were reading the book as a member of this society, it would make sense to me, but it doesn't. Right. Oh, isn't that neat? But then on the second read, I was like, oh, that's because he's going to be a gladiator. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
So I caught a bunch of that stuff on the second read. But so whenever he gets frozen into cryosleep, and what did you think? What did you think was going to happen?
Not what happened. And I was going to say, like, a lot in this book up to this point.
Yeah.
Usually when I read something or watch something, I can be like, okay, I see what's coming. And
I see how they're putting this together.
I see how they're putting it. And maybe I'm not 100% right, or like I guess almost everything in this book I've gotten completely wrong about what I thought was coming up.
Have you heard the study about how there's really no such, like, spoilers don't really ruin the story? Have you heard that study? So the idea is that the fact that you pick up on things on your way to the conclusion actually makes you enjoy the conclusion more, because then you feel like, oh, I see how they're doing this. I was able to follow this hunt, and then the reward at the end is the payoff that, oh, I was right about that. And so, there was a lot of setup, but then when you watch something where the twist is just so out of left field and you're like, what, where did that even come from? Then a lot of times it ruins the movie, Yes. I don't know. I still think that somehow those characters are important to the story. There's no way they got introduced for that like 2-chapter period where he gets put in the cryosleep and then wakes up on a completely different planet. He doesn't know how much time has passed, and he has, he's naked and and then he's by himself. It can't, what happened? Like, what happened to that crew? What happened to those people? Right. It has to be important. And then he thinks about him later on. He says, like, there's a few moments in the chapters where he's with Kat, where he's just like, I must have done something wrong. There has to be, there has where did the crew of the such and such guy? I can't remember the name of the ship, but and the ship has a name. Why give the ship a name if you're never going to see it again? There has to be more to that than we know.
Well, it's so there's certain parts, like when we were talking about the female pilot. So she first rejects him. Then when he's getting ready to leave the planet, she shows up. And I'm like, okay. Yeah. I was like, here it comes. Now they're going to be together.
Now she's going to go off with him. Yeah.
And then she's just like, yeah, see ya. And then I was like, okay, I was wrong about that. And then with this group, you're like, okay, new people. And then literally this chapter set up. And then the very next chapter, they're like, like you said, he wakes up and they're all gone. And then he goes and he finds the ship. And I was like, okay, now we're going to get answers.
Yeah.
And then the girl's just like, yeah, everything in it's scrapped. Like the letter that Gibson wrote him. So
God, the letter. What was the point of the letter? Why did that even?
That's what I was like. I was like, this is awesome. I was like, he's finally going to get the letter. She's like, yeah, we got rid of everything. I was like, what? I was like, this doesn't make any sense. This letter, he went through much stuff to get this letter and to protect this letter and to do this letter. And then it's just like, nah. I kept thinking it was going to come up. And then he's like, oh, I've been here for 3 years now. And I'm like, well, obviously the letter's really gone or something.
I keep thinking that this is a Picard learning to play the flute scenario. Hadrian lives out this entire life on this planet, and then he wakes up and he wakes up from cryosleep on that ship. And then book 2 is actually this is where the story begins. And that might happen. Something like that might happen. I don't know if it did. If it did, it must be done so well that people didn't backlash against it. Because there's 4 more books after this. Which I put I know that I have coming. I put all on my Amazon Christmas list, and my mother-in-law basically just buys me whatever's on my Christmas list. And so, and you can cheat, because if you go and you try to buy it, it'll say someone might have bought you this on your Christmas list. So I know,
might have.
So I know that I'm gonna have this set here pretty soon. Except for there's a newest one that is only released on hardcover, and I want all my books to match. So I'm gonna wait for the soft, not soft. Paperback to come out.
Paperback.
So yeah, man, I don't know. So what did you think the section of the book that you're in now, where Hadrian, he's went through his experience alone on the streets and stealing stuff, and then with Cat and even the cat thing, I felt like on the first read, I felt like that was several chapters, but it's only 2 or 3 chapters.
Yes, and that's another person. I was like, okay, so now he's got this great companion. They're gonna have an adventure, and they kept talking about. I kept thinking that because he would say something and then he the author would be like, she gives him a strange look, or she's looking at him in certain ways, and I kept thinking she's gonna have some secret, she has access to a spaceship.
Oh yeah.
Or something along those lines. And then you go through this thing and then jump to the next section. She's like, oh yeah, she's sick and she's dead.
Yeah, she dies. The whole planet gets a plague.
Right, and I'm just like, wow. Another thing
that is a really good this whole planet gets a plague, and it's like COVID-19 but times 100, and people just are dropping dead, and this poor asshole that can't possibly get sick because of a genetic mutation just has to live, he just has to wander around without any money. He can't. So that's another interesting thing, is that he can't, he could easily get himself out of the situation, but he doesn't want them to do a blood scan, because then it'll send a message back to his dad, and they'll come get him and take his ass to the chantry. And so he is willing to live this life because it's somehow more free than the life he was living on Delos, or even worse. I'm sure the chantry would be even worse, because he would be forced to harm people and stuff that he doesn't want to do. But he's willing to be a gladiator.
So this part reminded me a lot of the actual movie Gladiator.
Yeah.
Where what's his name meets all the other people that are also gladiators, and they all form a team to Maximus, Decimus, whatever. But anyway, that's what I got out of this, because he goes in there and he's like this loner guy, but then like he meets people and he all of a sudden becomes friends with them, and they fight as a team, and like he's instructing them on how to do things, and like
this was really, it felt like Kaladin with Bridge 4 kind of thing.
Yes, definitely.
He's in with the underdogs, and he's using his background to kind of train them, and not only make a name for himself, but also try to better their lives in the process. And he picks up a I guess not really like cat, but he picks up
whatever.
Yeah, he picks up a character that he's kind of taking under his wing to make sure he survives and stuff.
Which is another character that I got wrong, because the way it was going, I was like, okay, he's going to kill him off in one of these early bouts.
Yeah.
And he's going to have to like deal with loss or something. And then like next thing you know, it's like a year later.
Yeah.
And the kid's still alive. And I was like, okay, did not see that coming. Yeah. And like, because he was, a total fish out of water. As far as like, he was a gay prostitute. Was from what it sounded like.
Yeah, he was I think a child prostitute.
A child prostitute.
He was sold by his parents. Yeah.
Yes, and so like it was kind of one of those things where again, one of those growing as a character where you experience like a trauma or something. So I figured like he's going to take this kid under his wing, he's going to die, and he's going to grow as a character as a result of it, and blah blah blah, or something's going to happen. And then I was like, okay, so something else happened in that year. I don't know what, but
yeah. So in my reading where I am right now on the second read, I'm right at that area. So I don't remember what happens to that character.
Yeah, he's still like, the last thing I was reading was they had gone to look at a spaceship to buy.
Yeah, I know that he's trying to get him to go with him to get the spaceship, and there's like a whole like conflict where like, because
he learns that he's
a Palatine or whatever,
Palatine and apparently he's totally against it, and then Haydrion realizes like, yeah, he was sold to people just like me.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm kind of interested to see where that goes. If it's he turns on them or what. But
don't I don't want to say anything, but the book, it just keeps changing. It just keeps changing.
Right.
That's like we're in the section now where like I quit reading because I was like, it just pick something and stick with it, Hadrian. Like dang it, like don't just. Pick a major, all right, Adrian? You don't have to change your major every 6 months. We want to know what kind of hero you are. Are you a gladiator or not? But I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed the first part more on the second read. The part we're in now, I don't know. I kind of feel the same way about it. I kind of feel like things are happening, and like there's such gaps in time between each chapter, and it changes so much. I really think I'm going to enjoy this. I'm in it for the long haul. I want to read all these books now, and I really think I'm going to enjoy them on the level that I enjoy the Dark Tower and the Brandon Sanderson books. And I think that's a huge praise to this author, because this is his first published. What we're reading now is his first published book, and I think it's a very well written. I am really enjoying the character of Hadrian. But we are in a section where like I need something to happen. I need something to kick in and drive me through the rest of the story. Because right now I just feel like I'm just reading Hadrian's memoirs, and it hasn't really hit the hook yet. Like I don't know where this is leading to, but I think that where I left off, I think that I was on the verge of something, and so
that's how I feel too.
Yeah.
And so one of the things I was going to ask you is, so the whole thing about childbirth.
Yeah.
And I don't really like.
Well,
he explains that part of well, all that stuff is for the ultra rich, right? And
yeah.
So the way that sounds to me like is that people still, like normal people, still do it the old fashioned way.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah.
So then there's this character that when he's walking through the halls, and this is after he.
Oh yeah.
And he comes across that, not what are they called, the I can't even remember Kachari or the people that he was going to go to.
Chantry.
The Chantry. Yeah, he
Okay.
he runs across that guy from the Chantry, and
Yeah.
he's deformed, and he's like
a mess. He's like a
he,
genetic modification, like gone awry, like a deformation.
right. Well,
Yeah.
like I couldn't figure out what they were trying to say was his issue was, because it sounded like
he continues to be a
he
character.
Well, to me, it sounded like he was saying that his parents, instead of doing it with modifying, genetically, they actually had sex.
Oh, maybe. I don't know.
He was born that way because, well, I guess what I'm thinking is are people like Hadrian and that ilk,
Like they have to do
they have to do, because is it like incest, where if they actually did have sex,
they're too genetically similar.
The genetically thing would just mess everything up, and I was like, well,
I don't remember
is
that.
What he is?
I don't remember.
Like,
I don't remember that from the first read, but I'll look out for that when I reread it.
Because it kind of like he says something about it, and I was like, I didn't quite understand it, and I was like, because that's what I was kind of figuring was like, they.
I'll watch for it. I'll watch for it this time around. But that character comes up. It comes where I left off, where I quit reading. That character had come up again, and that so you're at a yet another turning point in the story. You're almost there. Yeah, I keep thinking any minute now he's going to wake up from cryosleep, and that because he kept the ring on is why he was having all these like wild dreams. Because you remember the pirate captain guy is like, it's like, I'm not trying to rob you, but like just trust me, you don't want to go in there with that ring, and he did anyway. And then that's had no effect to the story. So
basically, it was like they bandaged his finger up, and I was like, so they just needed a Band-Aid, and they were making like a big deal about this, like. It was weird.
I just had an epiphany. Oh my gosh. All right. People that have read Empire of Silence that may be watching this are going to laugh so hard at how wrong I am. But I just had an epiphany. You know how when we read books, I always say, well, here's what I would have done. We could call it one of those. The ring carries his genetic history, his genetic lineage.
Right.
What if he's like living Alistair Marlowe's life right now? He's really in cryosleep, but he's living out Alistair's life, and it's gonna tell the whole story of becoming his father, and like leading to like Hadrian's birth, and then he wakes up from cryosleep, realizing this.
He got passed through the ring into
yeah. Oh my God.
That would be interesting.
If we read this book and that turns out to be what it is, I'm gonna lose my mind. That would be a cool ending. I would think that was pretty cool. Yeah, I have no idea, but there's so many things that are like, oh, there must be a reason for this, but there's too many to count. Like there's too many. Is it just that this author is writing things so real that it seems like everything has a purpose, but it doesn't really, or does all of these things really have a purpose, and we just are not, the pieces haven't fallen in place yet. I'm not sure which is true. It's crazy.
I was trying to look, that guy's name is Gilliam Voss, I think.
Yeah, Gillian Voss.
But it didn't really, I was reading his thing in that
yeah, by the way,
character thing.
I found that was the only link to characters I could find, and it has a lot of spoilers. I didn't read.
Yeah, it does.
I didn't read anything. But I didn't like. I basically have only read the characters that I know about, and I haven't read more than a sentence or two because there's a lot of spoilers. But I can tell just by the sheer list that there's a lot more to this than we know so far.
Yeah, definitely. But I liked it. I really enjoy the book. I think it's well written. I like the fact that it keeps you on your toes, and like there is things that surprise you that don't happen or do happen.
Yeah.
It's not cut and paste like hero, follow this outline. Yeah. It's very pleasant in that way.
I really enjoyed it. I think that, but the funny thing is I didn't the first time I read it. So I think it's unusual that way. I didn't like it when I first read it. I mean, I read over half the book, so I guess I liked it more than I thought. But yeah, I really love it on the second read, and like I'm like bought in. Like I really think that unless this book ends with just like a total fall on its face, I feel like this is going to become one of my favorite series. It's really, really, really good so far. And it's just simple enough. It's not overly complex, but at the same time, there is complexity there. You know what I mean? Like, it's not convoluted, you know? But it has some political complexity.
Right.
I like it.
I like it too.
I can't wait.
I'm interested to see where it goes.
Yeah, I can't wait to get caught up. Oh, last thing, the Umand. What do you picture in your mind whenever they talk about the Umand? I can't picture it. I literally can't put it together. I started looking up Umand like fan art. Like I can't find I can't find an illustration. I can't understand. I either think they're kind of like Daleks with like tentacles coming out of them, or they're but they're too humanoid. I was thinking maybe they're like the Draenei on World of Warcraft, where they have tentacles, coming out of parts of their body, but they're still kind of humanoid.
Right.
But he even says, like, whenever he looks at the Cielson, they are recognizable to humans. They have a head, 2 arms, and 2 legs, whereas the Umand, like they are completely unrecognizable, and they have all these tentacles. And I'm like, well, what is that? I can't picture. I don't feel like there's enough there for me to picture what they look like.
No, and I was trying to see if there was anything in this thing that described him at all.
Yeah, it's a good idea.
Well, I don't see.
And I know that they come up again in the story where I've read up to, but I don't know that they're like important to the whole story. Like, are they going to be a third faction in this story? I have no idea. But yeah, they're just
well, like you almost think of Davy Jones from like the Pirates of the Caribbean movies, with like a human that basically has a tentacle face.
That's what the Draenei look like. Yeah. They're basically Draenei. And that's kind of what I'm thinking, but that's too humanoid. That's too That's too recognizable. I don't know, man. That's weird. I feel like it's probably missing some description there.
Right.
I'm gonna go back and read that chapter or something.
It's probably. I mean, you would think it would come up again at some point. Like feel like that's one of those things that
they drop in.
They drop in, and then to kind of give you that, like, oh my God, what was that? And then they come back and talk about it. Like, there's definitely a lot of groundwork laid out in this first third of this book, and it just still trying to get used to all the names and things like that. And the one good thing about this is they don't get too much into the like families, so it's not like Game of Thrones even Dune. Even Dune, they get into a lot of that, but like, at least it's the family's kind of just to this one family, Hadrian's family. You're not getting all these names thrown at you, and
there's really not a lot of because I was thinking about that whenever we were preparing for the show, and I was trying to make a list of all the main characters, and it's really not a large list. But they have really good interactions with each other. We kind of glossed over his relationship with Gibson, but Gibson is the most father-like figure in his life. So much so that rereading it for the second time, I was even thinking, like, is it possible somehow that Gibson is his biological father, but because of the whole being born in the vat and all that stuff, it can't possibly be. Also, another thing we kind of glanced over that I think is going to have more importance in the future, and the book kind of glances over it too. The fact that Liliana Marlowe has like these like sleeper agents within Alistair's kingdom, which is what the one pilot lady was. So I think that's going to play a role later on in the book. And when you were talking about why is Hadrian so genetically different than Crispin, I was thinking my fan theory that I mentioned that I had. What if Liliana intentionally manipulated the DNA of Hadrian to try to, and that's why he's also kind of her chosen son, and maybe that's why Alistair has always had this like spite towards him versus Crispin, is because he kind of knows that this is the case, or is figuring
like
it out as Hadrian gets older. So I don't know. Lots of theories around what's going to happen next. But I'm confident it's going to be good. I think this book would really, really, really have to shit the bed for me to be let down.
Right. And the one thing I've heard too is, as far as the books that are out, that this is the one that's the hardest to get into.
Really?
The next couple ones get even better and better. So
it's because of the whole section we're in now. I'm telling you, it just changes too much. It's just like you're living this guy's like entire life all at once, and that's why I think that must be somehow this is setting up for. I feel like Hadrian is living somebody else's life, or living like there's got to be some other. I don't know, but then how would he have? Would he be living through his father's life, but somehow having his thoughts and affecting his? You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. That doesn't make any sense. It's probably not. It's totally Hadrian. He's not going to wake up in a cryo chamber. But yeah, I don't know.
You got to figure there's a lot of these characters that he's like, oh, like Gibson. Oh, I don't know what happened to Gibson. What happened? Is he alive or dead? What happened?
No, we know Gibson is coming back because
we know he's coming back, but you don't know anything at this point. It's been however long. Same thing with his mom. You don't know what happened with he has no idea. Did she get captured? Did they figure anything out?
But what I'm saying is there's some clues because Hadrian, the future Hadrian that is writing this memoir knows what happened.
Yes.
And so he does drop clues. Like whenever he talks about, and in that moment, I thought Gibson died and I would never see him again. He didn't. It turns out he was exiled, but that wasn't his last day, or something like that. Like he's
exactly.
We kind of get a glimpse because Hadrian, future Hadrian, knows,
Right.
But yeah, you're right.
That's what I'm saying. Like all this, is coming. So they didn't That's why I wonder about that Starship crew, because it's kind of
why would Hadrian? Why would future Hadrian even write that part of his memoir?
Right. Because the way it makes it sound is at some point somebody took over their ship, shot them out into space or something, and then scraped the ship for money, and then I kept thinking, well, if they got him in space, why would they have brought him all the way down to the planet and then threw him in an alley? Why wouldn't they just eject him out into space too?
Yeah.
And then I feel like maybe that the crew. My first thought was that the crew did that, and then then he says, oh, these people, when he confronts them, he's like, oh, these are the people that dumped me in the alley. So I'm like, but how did the ship get to this planet? And I feel like there's too many open questions
for
that to be the end of it. That would just seem very weird.
I don't know, man. I'm still on team. I'm still on team. He's living out Alistair's life or something, because also, why does the ring even matter? Why does the ring, putting on the ring before he goes into cryo, was it just to illustrate how important the ring is to Hadrian? Well, that's already been illustrated 100 other times. This is not the first time we learned about how important that is to him. That it has to be a plot point that he was wearing the ring and he shouldn't have been.
And then the fact that he makes the choice to wear the ring, and then he wakes up and the ring is gone, and then he still winds up getting the ring back. He still winds
up finding it again. Yeah, yeah.
And you're just like, okay, that's weird too.
He couldn't.
Why was the? Yeah, they just handed it off and then lost it and found it later. Why? I don't know.
They were just short a few chapters. If it's that's the thing. If it's not important, all this stuff is going to feel like it was just fluff. But I truly don't believe it is. So
yeah, no, I feel like there's more to all of this. Definitely.
So I was going to play a video game tonight, but now I want to go read the book. I want to get caught up to where I was whenever I left off, but I don't remember all the gladiator stuff. And so I was listening to the audiobook, and I was just sort of letting it play. It's reminding me of things that I read the first time, but I'm just keeping up with you. And then we got to the gladiator thing, and I was like, oh, I kind of forgot some of this. So I need to maybe quit listening to the audiobook and go make sure I read it and retain it, because I don't remember what happens. Like you said, that character survived. I don't even remember what happened to that guy. So yeah, I'm going to start reading closer now because I'm getting closer to where I left off. All right. This was a cool episode. Really glad we did it.
Yeah.
And